Hi, I'm Megan Johnson. This is Young Entrepreneurs, Profit versus Pitfalls. I am so excited today to be talking to Diana Lowe. Now, Diana and I met through her sister, Melissa. I happened to meet Melissa here at this studio because I needed to get my dress off. And if you're a woman and you've got the dress, it zips up the back, you know it is sometimes a two-person job just getting dressed. And so Diana's sister, poor woman, hadn't even known me for 10 seconds. Nice to meet you. And I turn around and I asked her to undo my dress. And she was so nice, even after that rude awakening of having to help me get undressed. She introduced me to her sister, Diana Lowe. We had a great conversation virtually, of course, like everything lately. We had a wonderful conversation, and she told me about her company, Blue Light Leadership. And I just couldn't wait to get her on board, hear more about it. So Diana, I am so glad to see you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I can't wait. We're going to have so much fun today.
I know, it's going to be great. So now tell me a little bit more about Blue Light Leadership, because I'm thinking about when we had our initial conversation, we talked about everything under the sun, but we didn't really talk a lot about your business.
Because I find that when I spoke to you, you're just such an open, wonderful person. I could just talk about everything. But I'm happy to tell you more about Blue Light. So at Blue Light Leadership, we educate, coach, and train leaders on emotional intelligence so that companies can keep their top talent. So what does that mean? Leaders typically call me when it might be an HR person, it might be a leader, but they typically call me when they see somebody who has great potential. Maybe they're an executive already, maybe they're a high potential executive. And for the sake of saying it in a kind way, they're not progressing. So they're either not playing nicely, there's high turnover under them, or maybe low morale. And that's what we do at Blue Light Leadership. We really help them gain self-awareness, find what helps them in their work environment without telling them, right? So it's coaching, really. And we look at 42 different behaviors in emotional intelligence, and we're able to chart them as they're on their journey to see how they grow.
So now, when I hear you say emotional intelligence, of course, I think about the book that came out a handful of years ago, well, a long time ago, about emotional intelligence. I thought it was a terrific book. Is that what you're referring to when you talk about emotional intelligence?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I feel like most people, they know emotional intelligence, they know the word emotion, they know the word intelligence, but emotional intelligence is really a set of skills that helps you identify your own emotions, manage your own emotions, and actually make better decisions through recognizing other people's emotions. So it's a set of skills. There are a lot of different models out there, but mostly it's about being able to identify what you're feeling so that you can make better decisions. Because decisions without taking into account emotions, they're not always the best decisions. I would say 99% of the time, they're missing some information.
So, for example, if you got a call from the HR director and they said, we've got this person, Megan Johnson, people hate working for her, she is a nightmare, but for whatever reason, I possess some skill that they're going to keep me on board. What would the process be? Then do you and I set up a call, or you come and hook me up to like a bunch of electrodes? What happens?
Oh, that's the next step, the electrode step.
The electrode step, that's the step I really want to do that step.
We just fill you with cotton candy to make you sweeter. That's really what we do.
If anything that involves food, I'm there.
So really what we do is, if an HR leader connects with me, what I want to find out is, what is the problem? So I try to look holistically at the problem. Mm-hmm. And if it's a bigger problem, then I try to give them information on that. So I do an assessment on the actual problem. But if it is the leader, what I do is, the first session is a coachability session. We call it a goal setting session. And I want to know, how coachable is this leader? Because I'm not going to tell anybody that they're this way, that way, or another way. But in this coachability session, we talk about, like, what are their problems? What are they perceiving to be difficult or hard? Or potentially, what can't they get their team to do? So it depends on what the symptoms are, but I need to see in that first session that they have awareness that something is not going well. Maybe their career is plateauing. Maybe they're unhappy with their current boss and we need to work there. But in that first session, if they're not aware that there's a problem, then I know that this is not something that we can work on with them. But I would say 99% of the people that I work with, they're aware. They just don't know what to do.
So what happens when you have someone that is not aware there is a problem? How do you handle that? If you're in that session and they don't seem to be aware that that a problem exists, what's your next step?
So there's two things. Firstly, I engage my emotional intelligence and I try to see it from their point of view, not to project my own beliefs or, how I'm feeling, but I just try to see, like, is there a possibility that culturally they have no context for why they're speaking to me? So if they're really, really unaware, which I've worked with maybe one or two people, then I just ask them, why do you think we're talking? And if they're like, I don't know, I'm like, okay, well, I ask them a couple more questions. And really, for me, it's a curiosity session. I want to know where they are in their life, if they're having difficulties outside of work versus inside of work. And I want to go back to my client, who's the company, and say, I think it could be something deeper and I don't know what it is. But I mean, I don't cut them off or I don't tell them, hey, you have a problem. I just ask really good questions to help them get aware about the situation. Was that a boring answer?
Well, of course, I was hoping to hear more about electrodes, like maybe you turned it up or something with the electrodes. But no, that actually makes a lot of sense. So let's say you in our conversation, you discover maybe what my problem is, or I don't want to use the word problem, but whatever I'm struggling with, and we're going to move forward. What happens next?
So then we put the electrodes on.
Oh, thank goodness. I have been waiting for that. That's the only reason HR got me in here. They promised me a good time with the electrodes.
Well, that's all the rage now, electrodes. So let's say that they say, yes, I see, I'm having a problem. Nobody's listening to me.
Okay.
And what I usually identify is there's some sort of skill gap. Like either they're conflict avoidant because they don't know how to address conflict because they get so emotional or they shut down.
Okay.
Or maybe they don't know how to work with people because they're micromanaging. And that could be a skill gap of delegation. So it's really just, usually it turns out to be skill gaps. And then in that session, I'll ask them, is this something you want to work on? Typically they say yes. And then I go back to the HR and I encourage them as well to go back to their HR and say, like, hey, I think working and doing this will be beneficial. Once we get the go ahead, then I know you're expecting the electrodes, but then we do a 360 emotional intelligence assessment. So we get all the people around them. So we get their boss, their peers, their team, could be vendors, could be if they're client-facing clients. And then we look at these 42 different behaviors and we see how are they measured. So the person who's rating, we'll call them the rater, like a boss who's rating the person who needs help. We'll say, is this behavior important to you and how is this person demonstrating it? And so between those two things, let's say, for example, this person's always on time, but they're working in a Latin American culture where that's not really important to the culture. Then we can calibrate their behaviors. And once we have a full picture, then we get to see, okay, where are their blind spots? And most of the times what I find in most organizations is that there's very little feedback and accountability. So once we get a very clear view of, hey, they don't think you're doing enough of this, or you don't think you're doing enough of this, and they see that you're doing it fine, then we can calibrate and see what behaviors need to be worked on. We look at mindset and how to thrive at work as well. And yeah, that's it. And it goes through the coaching process. And at the end, we measure it. So we look at the beginning, how do they do? And then we look at the end.
How long does this process take from let's say from the first initial meeting where we're talking till when you say, we're done? My work is done here.
We're done. I never say we're done. We can always work more. And that's the beautiful thing about this. We can always work more. I think that 6 months is typically a really good amount of time to let somebody introduce different behaviors and see and feel the difference. But it could be 3 months. It depends on what the actual situation is. So it could be anywhere from 3 months to a year.
Okay. And when you said, so we're going to use myself as an example, I'm the one that you're coaching me, and you're going to bring in maybe my boss, maybe vendors, and I'm visualizing we're all sitting around in a room together, like a big intervention. Is that what that's like? Or are you communicating with all these people on a different channel, on your own, or one-on-one?
Like telepathically, I'm like,
Using your ESPN.
ESPN all the way. I'm like, can you hear me? So it takes a little bit of tuning. That's where the electrodes
come in.
Well, actually, it's easier than that. Okay. It's a web link, and the person who is getting the feedback on themselves, they get to choose who it is. Okay. Now, they can choose people, like they could choose their boss or not, but typically if the company is paying for it, they'll know who to choose, who's right and appropriate. And honestly, I work a lot with executives, so they want this feedback that maybe they aren't getting from the people around them, or at least in a way that they aren't hearing it. So this allows full anonymity. Nobody can, you can't attribute anything to any one person unless you do have one boss and they're rating you. So that's the only way. And typically nothing bad is said. It's just calibration of behaviors. Like, we need to see you step up more, or we need to see you dial it back. I find in professional environments, people are pretty tactful usually, not always, but usually.
And what brought you to doing this? Because I think this is so fascinating. I mean, this idea of emotional intelligence and the way that you're describing using it to help people in their professional lives, and not only help that person, like in our scenario, myself, you're the one coaching me, but then you're also helping everybody that I'm interacting with. So it's this huge ripple effect. But I'm really curious what brought you to, start Blue Light Leadership from the beginning.
So Blue Light Leadership is born from toxic work environments. Okay. I have had more than my share of working in toxic leadership environments. And I started my career in finance, and I started in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, but then transferred over to London in the UK. And I worked in finance in the UK. And the amount of bro culture that is steeped in that world, and the amount of lack of accountability, the amount of misogynistic language, behaviors that people just let fly freely. I mean, I really went through the ringer, so much so that I was diagnosed with clinical depression, and I had to take work off 6 months to recover from it. And I thought, when I had that time away from that environment, it was like a real turning moment for me, and a real turning point, because I said, going forward from this moment on, I'm going to be a part of the solution. So I never want anyone to experience that. Now, of course, me alone, can I do it? No. But I do believe myself, my company, as I grow it, the other people working in this, I do believe it's possible. So being in a company where you feel that your mental health degrades so badly, that's unacceptable, especially in 2022. So my mission is to completely avoid that, overcome it, transform it, however we want to say it. And that's really what it's born from.
So this is interesting. So you were in London, and in my mind, I think to myself, we're past toxic environments. I mean, for someone your age, you're young, in the workforce, I think haven't we moved past that? Probably naivete on my mind, in my part, to think that. But what you're describing to me, it sounds like a toxic environment that you visualized 40 years ago. But what you're describing to me it sounds like just a really emotionally destructive place.
Emotionally destructive is a great way to phrase it. Absolutely. I think they exist in many companies. I think that we create them unknowingly, And I think it's a lack of awareness, the lack of accountability, because ultimately culture comes from the top. Mm-hmm. And in our society, just in the Western societies, even, the people at the top are either usually one of two types. They are complete go-getters, task-oriented, fast-paced, get it done. I don't care if we have to go through people and hire people and fire people. So there's that mentality of the lack of care for people, of people at the top, because that's what our system rewards. Mm-hmm. Or we have the complete opposite, which is the visionary who sees the greatness, who maybe starts a company or works their way up into the company. They get to the top and they like people so much that there's a culture of a lack of accountability. And it is a fine balance. It's an art as much as it is a science. So you have those two, in my mind, paradigms in our society, and one really doesn't value people, the other one too much. So we just have to find a balance, and each person, it's different, but it's possible. That's the key.
Really, I agree with that. There's these different types of leaders, and it always surprises me that there's some obvious drawbacks to each leadership style you're describing, but that they also find great success. When you hear about companies that all of us are familiar with, and you hear about troubles that they're having, so like let's pick on Uber or Amazon, and you start to hear stuff, grumblings from the employees. Mm-hmm. Do you have a little mental discussion in your head? You're like, well, I think probably what's going on with the leadership is this or this. Do you theorize on that at all when you hear about things like sexual harassment at Uber and the toxic work environment at Amazon that we've heard? Do you have any kind of little dialogue in your head about that?
I do, actually. So what I know to be true, because I work with some of the leaders in these bigger companies, what I know to be true is depending on your leadership and because these companies are so big, mm-hmm. you could have a pocket of a really good leader in an organization where it's safe, there's psychological safety, and the division works well. And then you can have pockets of other that are not so good, mm-hmm. right? So you have different types of leader. Now, when I hear things about Uber and the bro culture, what comes to mind for me, which I think is what you're asking, mm-hmm. is that I'm thinking, it's not that this person is a bad person. They just lack awareness. They just lack the accountability. They lack the openness to see that what they might say or how they might say it is either insensitive or not okay. And because they're at the top, they make the culture. So that's the culture. That's what people join. People hire people like them because that's what we know and what we get along with. So if I think what you're asking is I don't condemn them and say oh, these are terrible people. I think they're people who have little experience in terms of awareness. They just need to be made aware. So if I'm let's say, for example, a white male in America who grew up, went to an awesome college, had a great experience, I am not going to know the difficulties of a Black female growing up in the South, and I'm not going to know her difficulties because I never had exposure to that. So to me, it just shows a lack of awareness as opposed to nobody thinks they're bad. Nobody wakes up and goes oh, I'm a terrible leader. Everybody thinks they're great. I just think it's the awareness element of it. Does that make sense?
That makes total sense. I agree with you because when you're saying it's sort of a lack of an awareness, often when I'm having a conflict with somebody, I have to remember that their behavior really has nothing to do with me. It has to do with the way they've learned to work through life is successful for them. So they're treating me like they're going to treat everybody else. So it's a kind of a lack of an awareness. Yeah, that makes total sense.
And that's emotional intelligence. So for example, you owning your own emotions and saying instead of going oh, I feel bad. Mm-hmm. If you say, I feel really jealous or I feel resentful about, when you're able to really make it specific, then you're able to either process it more easily or make an action plan to say, I'm feeling jealous that Megan has this amazing car. So that kind of tells me I want that amazing car. So I might have a new goal from that. But here's the key about engaging our emotional intelligence. When we name it, when we tame it, and we own it, it's easier for us to observe the other person's emotions and not project
Okay.
how we feel. We do not create a story, but we can observe, oh, this person looks like this. Because have you ever been mad and you go into the world, something really makes you angry, and then everybody you see, the look on their face, it looks mad. And you're like, that person's mad and that person's a jerk. And it's because you've put this like filter, this mad filter on.
Yeah.
And what emotional intelligence happens or helps us to do is I'm mad, but just because I'm mad, I'm not going to project it on this person. Maybe this person is having a great day. And I just am in my mad filter. So it just allows us to make better decisions, say things that maybe we shouldn't say, right? So
I always call that like no, I always say no one's going to win with me today. I'm in a mood and no one's going to win. Doesn't matter what you do. You can give me a ticker tape parade. You're not going to win with me today.
and I think that's exactly it. So when you know that and you're saying like, let's say I'm in a funk. Why are you in a funk? Because maybe I lost a contract, so I'm feeling a little bit hopeless. Now, feeling hopeless is different than just feeling bad, right? So it's very specific. So now I know, okay, I'm feeling hopeless. Maybe I need to process this. Maybe I need to journal, do what it is I need to do. But then I'm like, okay, how do I create hope? If I wanted to really process and move through the motions, maybe I need to contact some more people to get a different contract, right? So it allows us to just move and process our emotions in a way that is palatable without stewing in them, right?
I love that. So you move from just identifying I feel hopeless to what do I need to do to create hope? I love that phrase. I'm going to use that this weekend because I love that phrase so much. What a wonderful phrase. Because you really are helping that person move from the feeling of hopelessness to taking an action rather than just waiting for the feeling to dissipate, but taking an action and moving it forward.
And what I find is working with executives, they don't have the opportunity to necessarily voice everything they hear, or they don't have the opportunity to work through these things. They could be frustrated with their team. But once we do the exploration, and not in a touchy-feely way, but once we say, like, what are you feeling? And what are those feelings trying to tell you? That's emotion theory. And we look at, okay, well, it's trying to tell me that maybe I need to move job, or maybe I need to move industry, or maybe I need to move my team around so that it works better, right? So they're trying to tell us something, but when we ignore it or push it down, then that creates a problem. Because when you push your emotions down, you keep pushing them down, they're going to explode one day.
They got to find a way out some way. So now, when did you start Blue Light Leadership?
So Blue Light Leadership was a morphing of Diana Lowe International. So Diana Lowe was my previous business. And it's weird because I know you and I talked about like things that didn't work for you before.
Mm-hmm.
And there was this time, I want to say it was like 5 years ago, everybody was calling their first name and then international, right? So that was a thing. And so I was like, I need a company name, I'll just do that. And what I found is that it didn't feel right for me. It felt out of congruency because it wasn't the Diana show.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't the intention of what I was trying to create. It was more about how can I bring people on this journey? So Blue Light actually is born from us working from our laptops and our tablets and our phones. And so the blue light that we ingest every day, and that's really where it was born from.
Oh, wow. Okay, that is so cool. I didn't even think about that blue light. Yes, of course. So when you went to your family and your friends and you said, I'm going to start, which was at the time Diane Lowe International, which then became Blue Light, what did your inner circle say when you told them that you're going to start this venture?
I think most people, okay, so how do I say this in a way that is palatable? I think most people, when you say you're going to start something, people are like, oh, okay. Yeah, good job, good luck. And I had one previous business before this. Mm-hmm. It was called Switched On Development. It was more of like training. I did soft skills training. So it wasn't really too much of a stretch for me to do this. But when I told my friends I wanted to do this, because firstly, they're not in this world. Like a lot of my really good friends, they have other positions or they have other roles in life where they don't really aren't close to this problem. So I think my family is always supportive in what I do. I think my husband's like, well, duh, like of course you would do that. It doesn't make sense, doesn't it?
Of course you're going to do it. You'll be fine.
Yeah, it's like this is what you've always done.
Yep.
So it wasn't like a big stretch for me. It wasn't like I had this major job in animation and I was going to quit everything to do this company or something.
And when you started it, how did you get that first client?
What happened is when people know you and they like you and they trust you and they know your work and you kind of tell them what you do, they go, oh, could you help me do this? So I actually started a while ago with Diana Lowe International, more speaking. So I would speak on leadership, speak on core values. People knew me from my previous iteration of doing leadership development and coaching and training with leaders. So they said, hey, we're looking for a speaker for this. And so it started more like that, like speaking. And then as I've been on my own self-discovery and my own journey, I love positive psychology. So I'm actually getting my master's in coaching applied positive psychology. And I want to help my clients. So any skills that I can gain to help my clients is really where I head.
Well, congratulations. I don't think we talked about you getting your master's when we talked last. Congratulations. That's great.
Thank you. I feel like, can I call myself a positive psychologist? I feel like that's all the reading I do, everything I do. So positive psychology, I think it intersects really nicely with emotional intelligence because it's evidence-based coaching on how we can help ourselves flourish. And emotional intelligence is absolutely the behaviors identified on how we can create better harmony. Yeah. And I think that's what it is. At my heart, I'm an idealist. I think people should get along. And practice and reality, people don't always get along. So
no, they don't.
I don't know.
I do want to ask you though, in building your business, can you look back and think about, there was, I wish I hadn't done this, or maybe it was something that didn't go quite as you had hoped or planned. Maybe share a little something. So if someone were listening to this, they'd like, okay, that's a mistake maybe I could avoid building my business.
Oh, so many mistakes. I feel like I've gotten to this point because I've made all the mistakes. Every mistake that a person could make, I probably made it. I spent like $30,000 on Facebook ads that didn't come out to anything.
Oh my gosh.
But
that hurts to hear that.
It does hurt, but here's what I think is at least I didn't go 200,000 in the hole. Like 30,000 is a painful loss,
right?
But it's not like I went into such debt that I'm still working it off, right?
Yeah.
So I think crucially for me, this is a mission-based business based on I don't want anyone to experience this. And I know that executives are absolutely capable of creating the change. And I know that I have the skills to help them. So it's less of, it took me a long time to get here, and the iterations and the mistakes I made, I needed to make, actually. So I don't know if I could save anybody, like, don't do this, or because I think you have to make mistakes to get there. If you can make the mistakes and then learn from them is the key, and not keep making the mistakes. So for example, if you are starting your business and you're, let's say, not great at negotiation, there are going to be some negotiations that are going to fail, or you're thinking, oh, I should have followed my gut on that one and not got into business with this or signed this contract. But those are things that you need to learn from quickly as you can, and then correct course. Because I don't think anybody should be sheltered from mistakes. Mistakes are the greatest place that we can build character. I started this moms program because I was like, moms need support. I'm a mom myself. I have 2 small children, and it was a huge flopperoonie, but I couldn't have known that because I mean, I had to course correct, right? And it's not like it didn't help people, but just how I was doing it, it just didn't work. And that's okay. So I think the key is not to shelter yourself from mistakes, but to make the mistakes and know, firstly, believe that you're resourceful. And number two, that you can recover from any mistake.
Okay.
Even if you have a reputational mistake, I mean, even whatever mistake, there's always a way to bounce back. So don't believe the inner hype. I think that's what I would say. This self-doubtingness, who am I to do this? Well, if you have the idea, you're probably the right person. The key is to just keep going. So I think that's what I would say.
Again, now you've given me another word, flopperoonie. Is that what you said? Flopperoonie?
Probably. Probably.
I'm gonna use that this weekend too. Flopperoonie. If you were gonna give a young entrepreneur, or really an entrepreneur of any age, a piece of advice, what would your piece of advice be?
Get a business mentor.
A business
Number
mentor.
one.
Okay.
That changed my life completely because so previously I did not have business mentors. I was like, I'm gonna go at it and I did, and it was painful and I made a lot of mistakes and I learned, but game changer, number one, having a business mentor on my side is just like, it's like being an orphan to being in a family where you have parents, right? So your parents, hopefully, if they've had a successful business career before, they'll tell you what not to do, what to do. You can ask questions. You can feel a little dumb and say like, should I do this or should I not? And they'll give you their wisdom, hopefully. That was a game changer for me. Game changer, 100%.
That's great advice. I think that is really good advice. This has been so much fun. I could talk to you on and on because you also have a British husband, right?
I do.
Yes.
A very British husband.
I know we talked about that briefly. How still, even after all these.
Do you?
Yes, I do too. And they don't think Americans can drive, and they still say words I can't understand, even though they speak English. Still stuff I can't understand. So, Diana, if somebody wanted to find you, where would they find you?
Yeah, the easiest way would be, I'm on LinkedIn. So my handle on LinkedIn is Diana E. Lowe, or they can find me on bluelightleadership.com. It's spelled, I didn't spell it any fancy way. It's the word blue, the word light, and the word leadership. And they can reach out and contact me there, or LinkedIn. That's primarily where I'm at.
Oh, that's perfect. And she is on LinkedIn. I have connected with her on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. This has been, again, a terrific conversation. I've had so much fun talking to you. We could just keep talking, but I know that you've got things to do. This has been Diana Lowe of Blue Light Leadership. She is no flopperoonie. I think we can agree. She is no flopperoonie. Thanks so much for listening, watching me, Megan Johnson, on Young Entrepreneurs, Profit versus Pitfalls. I'll see everybody soon. Bye.
Bye.